Welcome to the Agility in Real Life podcast, Take 5 in Real Life. Now your hosts, Mike Studeman, Jeff Lee, and Pat Campbell.
Hello, and welcome back to the Take 5 IRL podcast. I'm Jeff Lee, partner at Agility IRL and your host. And with me today, again, is Peter Borsella from Big Orange Square. Welcome back, Peter.
Jeff, thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, so if anybody missed it, our last episode was with Peter talking about kind of an overview of using Agile principles in the hardware side of things, right? We often associate Agile with software. It doesn't have to be that way. It can apply lots of places. And so if you missed that episode, I would check that out. It's a good lead into this one. But in this episode, we're going to get into reality a little bit. So Peter, you've not just talked about this stuff and trained it, you've actually done it with companies?
Yes, I know that's a funny question, right? But it's true. We are practitioners. We strongly believe that teaching is quite valuable. It's quite helpful. But as an instructor, right, if we're not in the field
Right.
working with customers on the floor, then we're not keeping up, right, with what the current thinking is, and because that changes over the years, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so in our last episode, you talked about a hardware example that you had. I think it was can you remind me, was it teller equipment or what was the?
Yeah, banking system. So, in the old days, if you would go into the bank because you had some cash that you wanted to deposit, right, the teller would count the money
Mhm.
and type it into a calculator or something, right? They don't do that anymore, of course, right? They drop the bills into a machine, and the
Right.
machine flip, 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 flip. It reads the bills, scans them, calculates how much money is there. The teller isn't really counting anymore. The machine is doing it, right? So that's
Right.
the type of system we're talking about, and more of like a modular approach where it's a desk, someone has a seat, someone sits down, and they have a workstation where they take care of that. That's a little more detail about the case study, right? That we just dabbled on a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So let's get deeper into that. Can you frame it up of like when you came into the organization, where they were,
Yeah.
how you went about doing this agile approach?
Well, the thumbnail description is that they had a successful product, this company. They had a successful teller system, and particularly in the United States, but they were losing market share abroad. It was an international company. They couldn't compete internationally. So what's the difference? Well, you know what bills are like in the United States, right? They're fairly straightforward. They're the same
Mhm.
size, basically the same color. I mean, that's changed over the years. But if you went abroad and you're doing international banking, even just within the euro system alone, the bills are different
Right,
sizes,
right.
right? Different colors, and they're all rectangular. But then international currency coming in also, they just couldn't figure out how to compete. Now they were smart people. They had the ability to produce products that would somewhat be helpful and successful, but they couldn't keep up. They couldn't keep up because of how long it would take them to create a new system.
Yeah, typical problem, and especially in a space that has hardware components, right? Where
Yeah.
I see it all the time where we have companies who have devices that get released every 2 to 3 to 5 years, and they're trying to do software in the meantime for incremental value, but those device lead times can be really long. So how'd you
Yeah.
deal with that in this company?
Well, we first had to get an understanding of, what does this typically look like for you? So the broad overview is they would spend about a year, maybe a year and a half, talking to customer, designing the next edition, right, of this workstation.
Mhm.
And then they would spend another couple of years actually building the workstation. They would come to the customer. So now we're talking about maybe 3 years, right? Come to the customer and say, ta-da, here it is. And the customer would say, well, We've been rethinking some things, and we obviously missed the whole business about left-handed tellers, and we redesigned our office space. So what you're showing us now, it doesn't really quite fit with how our office space looks now. Back to the drawing board again.
Ugh.
Yeah. Uh, and we've Jeff, I'm sure you've experienced that, right? That we call this the unveiling effect, right? A
Right.
long period of time, and then there's the ta-da, and you're hoping people will say, "Oh, wonderful," but
Yeah, it
oftentimes
tends
people
not to
say,
work
"Wait,
that way.
wait a minute, that's not right." So what we focused on, and Jeff, I'm glad we can talk about this because it also connects with our previous discussion about principles. Because when we look at incremental delivery, unfortunately, I believe that the software world has set an expectation that works with software, but doesn't necessarily work elsewhere. And that expectation has to do with you have to produce something that is shippable or releasable,
Right.
right?
Yeah, we hear
Every
the term, but potentially releasable product increment or potentially shippable all the time. Yeah.
all the time, right? And makes sense for software. But what if you're building a new process, launching a new program? What if you're building something physical? What does that really mean? So what my business partner Hubert Smits and I did is, we sat down and we dived into the principles and looked at every word, right? Like for example, the Agile Manifesto and the Scrum Guide. And what we try to do is extract what are we really saying here? What are we really trying to do? Because if we weren't so much focused on software, there's got to be some other truths that are buried in here. And this is what we found, that when you're planning out an increment of delivery, when you're planning out an iteration, when you're planning out a sprint, we're asking the teams to think of these three questions. Is what you're going to be delivering considered valuable?
Hmm.
It's kind of obvious, Jeff, right? But sometimes we don't ask.
Sometimes we overlook that, right? And we just do
Yep,
what's been asked of us.
just go and do it. Yep.
Yeah.
Um, Second question has to do with empiricism. Is what you're working on going to increase your knowledge about what you're supposed to be creating or how you're supposed to be creating it?
Hmm.
So knowledge gained, right, is an opportunity for us.
Yeah.
And then the third question we ask the teams to consider is what you're going to produce, is it inspectable? Is it something that the next area, and we'd like it to be the customer, but sometimes it's the next internal area, they can verify, they can look at it, they can verify, yes, this makes sense. So and you don't always get all three of those things, but we
No.
ask, could you focus on those questions? So this team, in their effort to create a new teller system, they went into a 1 month delivery cycle, and they focused on that question. And here's what they learned through this discussion. What is the biggest challenge that we face when we are creating one of these new stations? And it became obvious very quickly. The biggest challenge is designing the workstation in a manner that could get legitimate customer inspection, because they would spend again a year
Hmm.
plus, and they'd have a paper design, right, or a CAD CAM design that
Right,
they
right.
said, how can we produce something that's more practical for the customer? Now, Jeff, this is fascinating because this is where the mindset, right? It makes all the difference in the world. This team spent that first iteration building a wooden design model They went to IKEA. They bought a bunch of furniture. They came back, and by the way, and what they built, it was nicely done. I mean, it wasn't just, nails sticking out of it and rough edges. No, it was nice and painted and everything. They spent a month creating a physical representation of a workstation.
That's really interesting. So that sounds like, from an outsider's perspective, or maybe somebody who's adjacent to that effort in the company, might be looking at that and saying, "Why are you wasting your time doing woodworking?" Did you run into that?
Exactly. So what this required was management, they had to approve, in quotes, if you will, right? They had to understand and support what this team was going to do. Now, Jeff, one of the, I think, helpful responses to any management skepticism is, look, we've been missing our delivery connection with the customer over a 3-year period. Give us a month, right? Give us a month to see what we can learn by doing this. And that's the investment risk we're asking you to take.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, if we come out of this after a month and we have learned nothing, and we don't see that there's any opportunity to learn anything in the second try,
Yeah.
okay, we'll fall back.
Yeah.
But
Well, I'll even say that if you've learned nothing, you learn something, right?
that's a very good point. That's a
Yeah.
very good point. Yeah. Yep. Um, okay, so they build this. They show it to their potential customers, and now the customers are pointing out, well, why is this over here? And the screen needs to be over there, not over there. And there's only one way to get to the seat from the left side. Is there an option to have it swivel so you can come in from the left or the right? Right? And all these questions come up. So what the end result is, they shaved off 6 to 12 months of design time by having something physical.
Wow.
Now you've shortened that time frame between when the customer is engaging in something and when you're actually going to deliver something. So it shortens the risk, right? That the
Hmm.
customer is going to change their mind from the time you produce that. But the key is you got to keep the customer involved throughout, so that if the customer does have some new ideas about, hey, we're redesigning the office, it's more of a collaborative, progressive discussion as opposed to, okay, we'll see you in 2 years
Right.
again, right? And
Right.
you might have the same problem again.
Yeah, well, and that customer involvement, obviously, there's a lot of benefits to that, just from the perspective of, if they're engaged with you on a continual basis, they're a whole lot less likely to go buy something from the competition, right? They're part of it. They have ownership.
Very good point. That's a very good point. Right. And matter of fact, that's even a selling point, if you will, right? That when a customer is looking at their different providers, like, yeah, but this provider, right? They're on top of it. They keep us informed the whole way. That alone, right, could be a good reason that your
Mhm.
customers are going to want to stay with you.
Mm. All right, so you got the physical prototype, you got great feedback, you cut your design time way down. Any other key learnings from that process, or big moments along the way?
Well, so the when I started describing what the team concluded in that first planning session, that
Mm-hmm.
that they needed something the customer could inspect. If you remember, I said there are 3 questions we asked them to consider. So this is in retrospect, right? So what we did, was it valuable? It absolutely. Now, even though someone might look at that and said, why am I paying a $800 bill to IKEA for wooden desk furniture, right? Was it valuable? Yes, right. For everybody involved, because from the people who were building and designing to the customer seeing it. Okay, so they agreed, yes, it was valuable. Did it fill in some knowledge gaps? Absolutely. The knowledge gap regarding what we're supposed to be building. It
Mm-hmm.
might not have added any new knowledge about how to build it yet, but the question what are we supposed to be building? Clearly, right, filled in a lot of gaps there. And then, of course, this business about it was inspectable too. Now, again, I said I don't expect that we can positively answer all of those questions every iteration, but in this case, they hit all three in that first attempt, and it changed the way they think about the work. And you see, the whole business about going to IKEA and getting the wood, that is just the physical manifestation of what's changed up here. And to me, that is more significant. You know, it's what we used to call the art of the possible, right? Well, what
Yeah.
could you do, right?
Yeah, I want to lean into a point you've made a couple of times here around risk. What we often talk about in, any old Scrum training thing is the more often we are inspecting what's going on, the better our opportunity to, recorrect if we're going the wrong direction, right? That's that whole empiricism thing you're talking about, having transparency and inspecting and adapting. Those short feedback loops all tie into that. Again, not just for software. So yeah, very key principle that you've, without explicitly stating it, been referring to multiple times here.
Yeah. I also hope that, when organizations, consider these types of opportunities, I hope I've made it clear, Jeff, I wasn't trying to focus on Scrum in particular, or XP in particular, or DAD in particular, right? Or Kanban, right? This is more about the principles, right? That we started mentioning, and if we could align with those, I think it just creates a whole lot of opportunity for us.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us here. Peter, if people want to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Big Orange Square, right? That's us. And by the way, the big in Big Orange Square is about what we've been talking about, right? That industry has a lot of parts to it. It's typically big production effort that you're going through. BigOrangeSquare.com, and my email is peter@BigOrangeSquare.com. So pretty easy to get hold of me, and happy to help with any questions that folks might have.
All right. Well, Peter, it's been nice to reconnect with you here. It's been a while since we've talked, and great to have you on the podcast here and add some knowledge, some value to people who are out there and interested in this whole hardware topic with Agile principles.
And Jeff, thank you very much. I'm glad we've been able to stay connected all these years, and it's a true privilege to spend some time with you. Thank you.
All right. And thanks everybody for joining us again on this episode. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Take5IRL podcast. If you like it, please go ahead and share it with someone, as well as like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Also, leave us a comment or a suggestion for a future episode. Again, thanks for listening, and we look forward to you joining us next time on the Take5IRL podcast.